Is it? Okay, I think I just ran out of time, so thank you. Okay. No. Thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. I was going to talk about role of technology a bit later, but it's now also a good time to acknowledge that technology is part of any design, and there's certain things that designers can do to learn from technologies and to involve, for example, testing in their work. Anyway, I'm going to talk about few things. Basically, my talk is two separate talks. By the way, we don't have sound. We'll need sound also. I will have two parts of the presentation, one focusing on type design and typography, another one builds on top of it and talks about wider consequences of work, about social responsibility, about definitions of what is design and what is a good design. Anyway, if you happen to live in an urban environment, just like most of us do, there's research that says that an average person living in cities is confronted with about 5,000 messages a day. That means every 12 seconds we encounter some kind of sign, some kind of message, and all of them, they have been designed, and all of them, they leave an impact on us. It's something we don't really pay attention much. It becomes, part of the noise around us. At the same time, this is the world we have designed for us. This is something that very few people pay attention to, and even fewer people take it as part of the work. So all of this, and this is a screenshot that I'm using from my country where I live, in the Netherlands. You cannot escape written communication. All of these messages have been designed by someone. There are not many, but there are some people who make their living with type design. Type design doesn't seem to be like an added layer on top of any other design, but on the other hand, it is the root of all visual communication. Without typography, the language is fleeting, it's ephemeral. Type design and typography happens to capture and materialize language, which is the essence of communication. It's squashed again. What happened? Anyway, I work with typography, and typography or typefaces, fonts, they work like voices. Just like some voices are more efficient than others, some typefaces are also more efficient and communicate better than others. And just like you recognize the voice of your mother, even on a phone when the connection is not very good, you recognize some typefaces even when the resolution changes. There's a striking similarity between how voices work and how typography works. Type design, and again, these could be circle if possible. Anyway, type design relies on three different disciplines. There's a language, because typography, again, is rooted in language and linguistics, and it makes language visible. There's technology, which we just experience how important technology is. And there is design, and this is what we study. What is interesting is that in most places, in most educational institutions, the language, technology, and design are separate departments, are separate disciplines, and they rarely converge. In order to work with type design, you need them to all get together. And I think that it also explains why there are not so many typeface designers or type design courses, because it requires knowledge of three separate disciplines, which are studied in separate places. I work a lot with programming, because we need to, typography has been always dependent on technology to make it visible, to render, to bring typography to life. When I usually tell people I work with type, the first reaction is, why? Don't we have enough typefaces? Don't we have enough fonts? There's this idea that there's a finite number of fonts, and we reach that number and we don't need anything more. And on first hand, you would tend to agree with this, that there's loads of commercial fonts already available. By some estimates, there's over 150,000 commercial fonts. If you go to big websites like fonts.com or MyFonts, you'll see an enormous amount of fonts available. But if you look closer at that huge number, first you see that most of them, they have been designed many, many, many decades ago. In fact, they're designed for print mainly. And they haven't really considered that now we read more on screens. If I ask you where did you read, what did you read last? Very likely it was on your mobile phone, on a computer. Some people will say print or newspapers. And fonts need to be optimized for both. And the old fonts, often they were designed for print first, and they haven't really considered what happens, when you bring it to digital devices. If you would say, how many of those fonts are available as web fonts, it's even smaller subset of the group. So from thousands, you get like a very small number which can work on print and web and do equally well on both. And if you'd say how many of those fonts are multilingual and work with Hindi or Gujarati and English at the same time, you have very few choices left. And that explains that there's a lot of work ahead of us. So on one hand, it looks like the work has been explored and exploited and there's nothing else to do. But with the world getting smaller and communication getting more global, and our ambition is to speak to people across the world, we need the tools that allow it. We need the tools that allow speaking across different cultures. There is about 7,000 languages in the world currently. And disproportionately, most of the fonts are really made just for Latin only, for English. And if you look at smaller regional languages, you often come to situations where there are very few choices, or there could be no choices at all. Have you ever heard about Unicode? That's kind of encoding database of languages. Most of the languages which are out there from the 7,000 are not yet even encoded. That means you cannot even use them on computer yet. There's still a lot of work for us to do. India is a good example. There's hundreds of languages in India, but unfortunately, most of them are in danger of extinction because they're being wiped out by English. And there are reasons for this. I mean, English on one hand allows us to speak, and it's a ticket to good paying jobs and to education. On the other hand, losing regional languages means you're losing access to information. That information may exist only in certain languages. So it is vital that, when we learn other languages, we don't ignore the others. There is a cultural heritage and traditions which is important to recognize, and we're building this continuity, and without being able to read the previous information, we lose some sense. There's some comparisons to loss of biodiversity. When languages go extinct and disappear, it's usually irreversible. It's very hard to revive them, although there are some exceptions, and I could talk about them. So it takes millennia to develop a language, same like it takes millennia or millions of years to develop biodiversity, and we lose it in a very short period of time. And that's why our responsibility is to recognize this and to support also smaller languages where there's a lot less commercial interest to work with them. Out of the 7,000 languages which I mentioned, the bigger half are at the danger of extinction, not the long term, but within the end of this century, which is very striking. And this is actually optimistic prognosis. The more pessimistic ones, they say 90% of languages will disappear by the end of the century, which is shocking. We talk about digital extinction, when fonts are, when they're not supported by devices, people stop using them, they're losing relevance. Do we have sound? Sound, audio, out. There's a video which I was hoping to show you, which talks about Iceland, a tiny country of 200,000 people. Icelandic is at the danger of extinction as well. And what the video is talking about, the audio here is high. It's the HDMI. Yeah.
Derived from Danish or something.
Let's start over.
This is Iceland's language planning department, a small group of scholars who create the words that Icelanders will need to navigate the future.
This is really the battlefield, because if we lose important fields, people start to look at the language as not complete, and then it starts to become just a hobby or something. And
English loanwords dominate conversations around the world, especially when it comes to fields like finance and technology. To stop Icelanders from depending on English, the language planning department works with dozens of specialized committees to invent terms for everything from medical conditions to foreign foods. So the words that you should not use, these are derived from
Danish or something.
Like canvas, capers. Okay.
Oh, pure enough. Okay.
Right. Contemporary Icelandic is nearly identical to the language of the Icelandic sagas, written more than 1,000 years ago. And one way committees create new words is by combining ancient Viking words such as volva, meaning prophetess, and tala, which means number.
From these two words, he made the word tölva for computer.
The campaign to keep Icelandic pure is working. Icelanders do use tölva for computer, along with the Icelandic words for emoji and artificial intelligence. But for a language to thrive in the digital age, machines need to speak it too. Few tech companies are willing to invest in a language spoken by only 320,000 people. So Siri and Alexa, for example, don't offer an Icelandic option.
The problems here is that it's nearly as expensive to make it for the Icelandic language as for English. So it costs a lot.
Iceland's Ministry of Education has budgeted more than $20 million to create an Icelandic language database. Their goal is to make it free for any company to incorporate Icelandic into their products anywhere in the world.
Yes.
How did you learn English?
School and the internet. Watching YouTube.
What are you watching on YouTube?
Minecraft. I don't actually watch YouTube. I just watch like Netflix, Friends.
You watch Friends on Netflix?
Yeah.
And it's all in English?
Yeah.
You can't watch it in Icelandic?
No, there's nothing that exists called Friends in Icelandic.
The impact of technology and digital tools has sort of cut both ways.
This is Ross Perlin, co-director of the Endangered Language Alliance, a New York City nonprofit that documents and describes languages, some so endangered they're spoken by fewer than 1,000 people.
Larger languages are further strengthened by all the kind of digital tools that stand behind them, but at the same time, there are spaces online for smaller languages.
Almost half of the world's 7,000 languages are at risk of extinction. Losing them means losing more than just words.
From a scientific point of view, from a linguistic point of view, just undeniably, there's an incredible amount of knowledge about history, the world, ecology, plants, animals. I mean, life-saving, critical information that is encoded and is in these languages and can't and shouldn't be just extracted surgically.
Icelandic benefits from a long literary history and a wealthy national government that considers the construction and maintenance of Icelandic words as important as the construction and maintenance of Icelandic roads.
Ég held að uppáhaldsorðið mitt sé sauðljóst. Það merkir eiginlega að það sé orðið bjart til að þú geti greint kind í fáeinna faðma fjarlægð.
But Icelanders have realized that if they want their language to survive, they have to reach beyond their borders and make sure they're part of the digital conversation too.
Okay. We're sorting out all the issues with technology along the way. So here we are in India, one of the most culturally diverse places that we know. And I've been fortunate. Should I speak here? I'll speak here. I've been fortunate to come here several times, and actually I started a company in Ahmedabad almost 10 years ago. Company I'm no longer involved with, designing fonts for Indic languages. These days I have my own type foundry called Typotech, where we work with languages, we design digital fonts, and we work with branding, with language research, and trying to make our work and work with local languages more relevant than any time before. We work with, again, I like to think that we're giving voices their shape. We're making sure that, that the text that you read has the adequate voice, and it supports it correctly, grammatically, and adequately across all platforms and technologies. Because our work is fairly multilingual, we often work with dictionary makers. This is a Collins dictionary, one of the largest British publisher dictionaries, which exist in over 200 languages, for which we design fonts. And because our focus is on multilingual typography, we can make it happen. And often it starts with simple things, with analyzing, for example, handwriting. Often technologies leave an impact. When the British came to India, they brought their printing machines, which are really not made for the local languages. So often they change how languages work. And we have to come back before that not to replicate mistakes of the past, of how old metal technologies changed it, but we do our own research and start from handwriting to analyzing how languages should render, and then finally converting them into digital work. So this is some of our recent work with languages, and we work with most of the world languages, not just India's languages, trying to make sure that, again, the results are acceptable by local communities, and try to make sure, for example, this is Apple's font on your iPhones, which will have problems with Canada, for example, and we're trying to solve them so these things don't happen. For this work, we often work with local talents. We work with Indian designers, so it's not made remotely only in Europe, although we have an office where we do most of the work. There's a lot of work made by local people. Some of them are from here, from Gujarat. Anyway, I didn't want to make it, I wanted to start talking about languages and importance of languages, but I'll slowly talk about design, so not to make it too depressing as a situation of extinction of languages. So let's talk about how new fonts are made even for English. I came across this picture. You probably recognize, well, if you're in old movies, you probably recognize the Frankenstein. You may have more trouble recognizing the actor whose artistic name was Boris Karloff, but his real name was William Henry Pratt, a British actor who worked in Hollywood and who played this character. And I became interested in how the same person can have very different expression. Henry William Pratt was this English gentleman who played in children's movies. But then his most famous character is this Frankenstein, scary creature. So one person could be both, could be, really scary and very kind. The third microphone. Let's see. And I try to look again at the visual comparison, and I try to look at what would be, if it was not stretched, what would be the most beautiful font ever made for English language. And many references point to Bodoni. Bodoni was this Italian printer working in the late 18th century, which produced, because of innovation with paper making and inking and letter forms, he was able to produce forms which are very thin and thick and therefore quite elegant. At the same time, I made a research about what makes the ugliest forms possible. What would the ugliest typography that men have made? And I came across this, which is a thing called 5-line pike Italian, and it was also made around the same time, and has nothing to do with Bodoni. It's two separate sources. But when I looked closely at this, the interesting thing was that the underlying structure behind both models is very, very similar. If you just look at the skeletal forms between the two, one we considered very beautiful, and the other one we consider to be very ugly. If you draw them both, in its simplest form, it's basically the same thing. And the difference between the two is really just how you hold the pen, the angle of the pen. If you hold it in 30 degrees, how most of the European calligraphy happens, this is what you get. You get a beautiful form. If you rotate it by 60 degrees, this basically how Gujarati would probably hold a pen. You get a very unusual letter form, which is, to Western eye is not very pretty. Resulting font was, I designed a font which was beautiful, and I designed another one which was ugly. But the interesting thing was like connect the two. So there could be a slider that connects the beauty and ugliness, and they could choose how much ugliness or how much beauty you want to show. So just by using the slider. And if you would interpolate the two, if you would, basically morph it, you get a perfect neutral form, which is neither beautiful nor ugly. It's just something in the middle. What I found interesting in this is that these two forms are historically rooted, but it's the connection between the two, what we can do as designers, that you refer to history, but you rediscover connections which haven't been made. So I think the work is new only because it looks at something which haven't been connected before, although the forms have been explored. We know forms of Bodoni. We don't see it in this context, so we change the context. This is a small presentation movie. Oops.
For millennia, mankind has endeavored to capture the ideals.
There should be sound again.
We have sought it in divine proportions, symmetry, and harmony. We struggle to define it, yet we know it instantly if we see it.
Ugliness is different. It assaults our expectations, violates all canons, twists conventions. Ugliness repels us, yet also commands our voyeuristic attention.
Karloff is the convergence of beauty and ugliness.
The nexus between the extremes.
The manifestation of their common ground.
Ugliness and beauty intertwined.
This is Karloff.
So there's a few work, again, which do work in a similar direction. One work is a recent typeface we published by my Indian friend, by Shiva Napal, who comes from Tamil, from the south. And he designed this typeface, which is an experimental display typeface, which is rooted in Kufi style of lettering that you find in Persia. But we tried to give it a digital twist, how to borrow some of the principles behind the decoration, where it combines the black and white in a way that it's really combined in a unit. Not to just design black forms, but making sure that the black and white is really connected. So for example, this would be how typically letter forms are made, but trying to make sure that we can do this, that there's equal space between every single letter. And to be able to do this, there's quite a bit of programming. So we asked another friend of mine, Tal Lemming in US, to write a code for us. So often we end up not using standard design tools, but writing our own tools, our own scripts, our own extensions, our own software that allow us to design fonts. They can do something which couldn't be made possible before, which are contextually conscious of its environment, where the right form is always chosen depending on its context. So it pays attention to the previous and following letter to make sure that, again, the spaces are equally distributed. There's lots of ligatures which had to be made, and they were made programmatically that allow this to happen. It's probably the only font where the entire word potato is a ligature. And the whole thing works, of course, with colors and layering, so it gets really complex. To be able to do just single form like this we had to design almost 5,000 letter combinations. And again, that's why the power of scripting is quite handy. This is fun part. We work with fun, very expressive forms, but most of the core work is really about the basic core of legibility and communication. This is Greta Sans. Well, this looks like a condensed version. It should be more extended. You get the idea. And when we work with type, we always try to make sure that we work on several variants at the same time. We don't just design regular or bold, but we're creating systems. We're creating systems from the beginning. From the very beginning, we draw like the most extreme, the lightest and the darkest. And it's a work which is inspired by another designer, a very important one, Adrian Frutiger, who came to Ahmedabad in the 70s and 80s to work also with Devanagari typography. This is his universe. And what the universe does, the font, is that it was the first typographic system that proposes how to work with design space in fonts. So not just looking at styles, but looking at intervals, about the white space in between, and making sure that the white space is as important as anything else. We do the same. We draw the design spaces, and from the design space we use the usable parts, and that's what we later publish. We make it very systematically to create type systems which do this. That they are the heaviest and lightest and widest and narrowest that can be made. There are a lot of things I could talk about. It comes with pictograms, and all of them come in, like there are thousands of them. They're all made in different weights. And of course, our work doesn't stop with English only, but we work with other languages. This is Cyrillic for Russian. But the same system which I showed you, which is called Greta, comes in Greek and Cyrillic, and this is Armenian, this is Arabic, this is Hebrew, and here we are, Devanagari. And this work doesn't stop. It's a continuous work that we continue. We create the same system that works with the same number of styles for Arabic, for example, which has been unprecedented. And of course, we did the same thing for Devanagari, which makes it the largest type system ever made. There haven't been anything made like this, which comes with so many weights and widths, and allows typography to find new hierarchies. In English, for example, we have a lot of devices, typographic tools to structure typographic hierarchy. For example, lowercase and uppercase serve as a distinction, and they can be used for emphasis. The italic can be used for added emphasis. These devices don't exist for other writing tools. In Devanagari or Gujarati, you don't really have italic. You don't have slanted, you don't have capitals. You don't have small caps. So you need to have a wide range of styles and widths that allow expressing the complexity of language as it is now. In the old days, you didn't have to do this because visual communication was a lot simpler. But today, with the really layered typography and visual styles, we encounter situations where you need to have and express, again, different hierarchies of text. This represents a lot of work, and I'll slowly go from specifics to kind of the wider picture. I started with the wide picture of the language, and I'll go to slowly kind of going wide again. My company, although we do a lot of non-for-profit work and we do a lot of research work, at the end it's a commercial company which needs to pay our bills and pay our employees. For example, to do the Greta Sans project with all these languages was years of work for 10 people, which represents thousands of hours of work. And that's why we rely on people like you to use them, and hopefully eventually to pay for it, except that this doesn't always happen. If you would go on the internet and search for Greta Sans free download, you'll get enough samples of pirated versions of our fonts. And Of course, like it makes me feel sad, at the same time helpless, you know, like what can I do with this? But at the same time, I think that's a part of a design challenge as well. Our work is not only creating work, but also making sure that the work is used, the work is, finds its right users, finds it, and it is relevant for people worldwide. One other thing I learned was that learning from example of digital music or other digital content. What digital publishers or music publishers tried to do 20 years ago was trying to protect their work by legal means. And that didn't work very well. At one point they realized like they have to make the work, they have to make music more relevant and more accessible rather than just protecting it. And that reduced piracy by a great deal. Services like Spotify made consumption of music, changed completely consumption of music. Or films, iTunes, you know, there are alternative ways. So while, you know, 10 years ago, 80% of people would admit that they're illegally pirating films or music, today it's a very marginal thing because it's so much easier to get to the right source of music. You can if you can find it legally on Spotify for just a very small fee, it makes all the difference for everyone. So Spotify is a kind of technological solution to recognizing changing patterns of how we work with digital content. What Spotify didn't solve, however, it solved it really great for the publishing companies and for the users. What it didn't solve is how to take care of people in the middle, people who make music. There are a lot of people who say, you know, music is consumed purely on the internet and with music streaming, but that doesn't pay back to content makers. People can talk about their music has been downloaded or played millions of times, but they never get compensated for this. Here's an interesting chart. In the old days, a self-producing artist, a musician, could produce just 100 CDs, sell them directly, and he would earn a minimal salary. Today, to earn a minimal salary, you need to have 4 million Spotify streams every month. Something that doesn't happen. So Spotify is a great technological innovation, but it doesn't, you know, protect or doesn't make sure that the artists get paid for the work. And if the artists don't get paid for the work, they don't really have reasons to make new work. Without new work, you don't have new music, new books, new anything, new fonts. So why I'm talking about this? We try to do something similar. We try to do Spotify for fonts, except that we try to make sure that people get paid for their work. It is a standalone application for Windows and Mac, where you can browse the entire huge collection of fonts. And if you find them, you can just, with a single click button, you can try any of those for free. And if you like it, you could rent it just for a short period of time. So instead of paying hundreds of dollars for fonts, you can just pay $2 if you use it only for a couple of weeks. We thought that this is our work as well. Our work is not just the design fonts, but making sure that fonts are usable for everyone. Because I understand that students would not have the budgets available to use high quality fonts. So often they resort to either illegal ones or to use the really not the very good ones. And of course, we're trying to make sure that we have extensive language coverage. So this is a program called FontStand. And FontStand, there's a huge collection of Indic fonts as well. And they are made from 50 different companies in the world. It's a company I started by invited these companies to participate to make it even better. And the best of all, we make student programs where students don't even have to pay. So if you sign up for FontStand at students, you get for every semester you work, you get access to all these different fonts. And it's not entirely selfless interest. I'm hoping that people get used to the really high quality fonts and eventually will pay for it on longer term. Right. This is end of my first part, talking about typography. I'm going to slowly switch to the wider part, talking about definitions of design. I wonder if I should have questions in halfway or just at the end. Maybe. Okay, we'll do it at the end. So I'll go to my second. Right, so I started, the second part is called Design is Not What You Think, which of course means, what is design? And it's not just a rhetorical question, it's a real question. What do you think design is? Is this design? I heard yes, hesitant yes. How about this? Is this design too? So what isn't design? It's an interesting thing, like that if we put these two things on the same level, it opens up a very interesting discussion about, okay, what is design and what is not. Often we tend to think that design is what we see in design museums and design shops, and we see like these are maybe design shoes, but something else is not a design shoe. It's not it's not a design object. And often we tend to kind of in our head make it that it's the price tag, it's the education of the person that makes a difference between what we consider to be design and what not. And I see that people start accepting it that no, this everything which is man-made uses elements of design and design thinking. And it's not a new idea. Viktor Papanek in the 70s and 60s defined the idea that all what we do, everything which is man-made, is design, and design is intrinsic to all human activities. So there are things which are not designed, the nature, although even the country where I live, even nature is designed. If you come to the Dutch forest, there'll be certain pattern of trees, and every single square meter will be designed because the soil and the ground has been reclaimed from the sea, and 30% of the ground in Netherlands is been designed by human hand. So I think, okay, we agree that design is not about really who makes it or where is it made. Design is not only something you made in London or in New York, but it can happen anywhere by anyone. The question gets more complicated about when you ask, what is a good design? And I could ask the question now. It's a tricky question because you need to define, what it means good design. And again, you can find previous examples of what good design was, how it was defined. In the idea of design society and design thinking comes from, it's a post-war Europe. When we try to use new economic development to power the economy, and so necessarily design was linked with growth, with prosperity, with business. And Thomas Watson was the head of IBM, and his famous quote was that good design is good business. And often it's used by designers worldwide to talk about the connection that it's good to invest into business, because good design brings the values back and it pays back for itself. Would you agree with this? Good design is good business? And can we turn it around? Is good business good design? It all gets tricky. Let me show you some examples. I find this to be one of the best examples of design. This is Henry Ford's Model T. Model T is like a phenomenal machine which was made, it's probably the most industrially produced cars, which was streamlined production on one location. It rethink the whole workflows and construction. It was designed to last. At that time, it was designed to lower the consumption. It would reduce the number of mechanical faults. It was an incredible machine. Henry Ford, when he talks about this, he said like his ambition was to design a car that would last forever. A car that you buy once and you don't need to buy another car again. Is it a good design? I would say yes. It's a fantastic piece of design that that is also sustainable. It's conscious of its environment. It's something that doesn't become obsolete. There's no need to buy another one. So this was, and it was cheap. It was something that made a real impact in the lives of people. Suddenly, even low-income people could buy a car, something which wasn't the case before. Other car manufacturers at the time, they could not match Ford. So instead of trying to make a car more reliable, or make a car with other benefits, lower fuel consumption, instead they focus on design features. This is Chrysler's Model B, which was the first car which came with different colors. It was a design feature. The car had a lot of mechanical failures. It had a higher fuel consumption. It was more expensive. The benefit was that it looked prettier. It attracted different clientele. For the first time, women were buying this car because it was not just black. It didn't smell as much of gasoline as a Ford's Model T. This was the design features. Another car manufacturer, and this is the General Motors, they went even further. They recognized that it doesn't really matter what's inside, it's the outside that mattered a lot more. And they managed to beat Ford. So while Ford was kind of convinced that they don't need to innovate because they created the ultimate car, a car that doesn't break and doesn't need to be replaced, these cars were made to be replaced all the time. And they're quite open about this. General Motors basically designed what we call the design obsolescence. Design obsolescence that when you see something, and next year you see something even better, even nicer, and you feel the old thing is no longer adequate. You feel an urge to throw away the old things and to buy a new one. They consciously try to reduce the cycle of a car to the minimum. And they're hoping that people will have to buy a car all the time. It's a fantastic business model. Is it a good design? There are other definitions of design. And later, in the 80s, the definitions were a lot more esoteric and a lot more focused on aesthetics. Dieter Rams is a well-known German industrial designer. You may have heard about him. He was an inspiration to many designers at Apple. If you like the iPhone, if you like anything that Apple produces, they are inspired by Dieter Rams, the designer. And his quotes are very famous ones. He talks about making it as little as possible, intelligent, trying to make it useful. He's not really talking about how it should look like. He's talking about its values. Let's look at another example, light bulbs. I haven't been to India for a while, so I don't know how is it. In Europe, you cannot get the incandescent light anymore. This kind of light is out of use. They've been replaced by LED lights. And this became the European Union regulation because the incandescent light, they were burning too much electricity and they're basically wasting it with heat. So LED are kind of solution to low power consumption. But at the same time, the LEDs, if you buy the latest LED, the expected lifetime of an LED is about 10,000 hours of burning time. 10,000 hours sounds like a lot, except when you see these, and these are light bulbs produced 100 years ago. These light bulbs lasted 100,000 hours, 10 times more than now. So is this a progress that we design a light bulb which uses less energy to burn, but you need to replace it 10 times as often? There's this light, which you may know, it's called the Centennial light bulb. It's a light bulb which was installed in 1901 and has been continuously burning since then. This light bulb has been on for 117 years without interruption. In the last 10 years, there's a webcam that so you can actually watch it burning. And the webcam had to be replaced 3 times already by watching the light bulb. So sometimes we see like the idea of progress is contradictory. We invent something much better, but is it better? When better is better? current models, design models, are designed to make more stuff and sell more stuff. And often design facilitates this. Design is trying to convince people that you need the latest fashion, latest jacket, you need the latest iPhone, latest anything. If you have an iPhone 4, it's no longer good. You need to replace it by iPhone, whatever there is. I think there are no quick solution to this, but I think what is happening is that we're recognizing this. We're recognizing that by living in consumer society, that we can actually change our behaviors. And designers can also change their behaviors and make their work a lot more conscious. Here is a Dutch architect, Thomas Rauw, who was tasked to design a lighting system for Amsterdam Airport. Amsterdam Airport, like any airport, needs lots of light because it's operational day and night. And when he was designing the lighting system, he came to Philips, another big Dutch manufacturing company, and said, listen, I don't want to buy the light bulbs from you. I want to buy the lights. I want to buy the light itself. Is it possible? You do whatever you want. I just want to make sure that the thing has enough light day and night. I don't want to be changing the light bulbs. Philips was challenged to think about light differently. Until then, their business model was to deliver the light bulbs. If you deliver light bulbs, your motivation is to make sure you sell as many as you can. Philips could design light bulbs last very long time, but then they cannot sell them. If they are tasked to sell not light bulbs, but sell the light itself, they have to rethink the entire model of existence. Until now, if you have the light units like one like there, if that breaks, you need to change the whole unit. You cannot change just the broken part. What Philips did is that they basically went to designs which they could never use before because they never had an economic model to sell these lights. They could go to very simple lights where every part can be replaced. And instead of paying for the product, you would pay for lux, the unit of illumination. So Schiphol Airport, the Amsterdam Airport, is not paying to replace new light bulbs. This is responsibility of Philips. Philips is making sure that for every year, uninterrupted source of light, they pay Philips this amount. And Philips, for the first time, they have a motivation to come up with the best they can do. No longer of what we can sell the most, but what provides the best sustainable light situation. You find examples like this more and more. There are other companies which producing products and making them accessible to people. There was an experiment in the Netherlands with a segment of a low-income society, people who could not afford high-quality appliances. Often they're forced to buy very cheap products. They're forced to buy very cheap refrigerators, very cheap televisions, very cheap ovens, things which are often faulty, they break, they need to be replaced, they consume a lot of power. Miele, a German brand, would decide to give them really high-quality appliances, and people would pay again for every hour of using those devices. On longer term, it's again much better. It's a win-win situation for the users, for the company, and for the society, because you don't need to replace the refrigerator every 3 years because it breaks, but you have one that lasts for a very long time. I find it to be good design. So good design is not only something that makes money, that is good business, but something that considers the wider impact of society. My own definition of design is good design involves everyone in the process, from the user, from the maker, to the what happens to the waste. Everyone in the process is involved and considered. It's no longer win at the expense of something else. It should be win, 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 win on every aspect. And this is what I find to be the good design. Um, 6 years ago, I started a magazine which would be about this. I wanted to make a magazine which would be about good design. You have to understand that at the time, if I would come to you and say, like, I'm making a design magazine, people go like, yeah, cool, let me show you. They would want to see it, and they expect that if it's a design magazine, it has to be very flashy, it has to be very glossy, it has to include a lot of colors, use some special effects with print, and it should be about design itself. It should be, most of design publications now are written by designers for designers, and we rarely escape that bubble of discussion. We'd like to think that our work is relevant for the wider society, but just ask your parents or your extended family to talk about design, and they'll often go like, wait, that's not my thing. Like, design is your thing, it's not mine. And I agree with this. So in order to do a design magazine, which is about what I consider to be good design, we had to stop calling it design, because design has such a bad connotations that makes us to use, to waste resources. It makes it unnecessarily expensive. It looks only at surface of things. We often forget that design can be about invisible things which make just the world better. So this was a design magazine that avoided the term design from the beginning in order to hopefully to find the large audience, to be able to talk about design to your neighbors, to your friends, to your families, to my brother who's an engineer and who would never pick up my design books because he says like, yeah, this is such an elitist design talk. I'm really interested just in good ideas. It's like, well, but good ideas is design. It's like, no. Good design is like is what makes one object more expensive from the other one, but it doesn't increase the functionality. So there's a lot of preconceptions about design. To do this, this design magazine was not only focusing on the content, but at the mode of operation. Because it's the operation, it's the inner working of design that makes a difference. So let's look at other magazines. If you would go, if you happen to be at the airport or any bookstore or magazine kiosk, newsstand, if you look at all these magazines, the current state of publishing is that if you buy any of those and you buy a Glamour magazine or, I don't know, Cosmopolitan, or if you buy, I don't know what amount, that money doesn't go back to the makers, to the publisher of the magazine. That money is lost in a distribution process. It doesn't reach, what you pay for is not what it costs to make. And the question is, who pays for the magazines? It's a strange world where all these magazines are funded fully by advertising. You could say so that these magazines are not made for the readers. They are made for the advertisers, and the reader is a commodity which is sold to the advertiser. So it's not, the reader, you being just a target audience, which is targeted, sold, resold. It's not only troubling for what kind of content you put there, it's troubling for all the decisions are made, because if a magazine is made for advertisers, the intentions and the purpose of this, it's much different from if it was made for the readers. So we started the magazine, again, I said 5-6 years ago, which was about design, but not calling itself Design Magazine. It was a magazine about unexpected creativity of people worldwide. And as trivial as it sounds, it was a magazine for the readers. And again, you would think like every magazine is made for readers, but as I explained, it's not the case. There are very few magazines which are made for readers, which means that the reader is central part of the audience. As I said, even if you look at the content of magazines, on industry average is that 54% of pages of any publication are ads. And that thing, and 100% of money, it comes from advertising. And if you look at history, the first example that started it comes from 1830s, where there was a first newspaper which no longer worked that people bought and they financed the publication, but they sold ads. And since 1830s, that model for publishing have not changed. It became the dominant model, followed, repeated worldwide. And when we started the magazine, we want to change this. We changed it not only in a way that we had some advertising, but 95% of content was pure content. When we had ads, they looked like this. These are basically messages, classified messages of our readers, readers. This was our only ads. We made a magazine for readers where the price tag had to be much higher than normally. And we wanted to make people realize what it is. So we are radically transparent about the operations of the magazine. We talk about financing, something that magazines don't talk about because they're usually trying to cover it. If someone is paid by third parties sponsoring, often they're not very proud of it because they're producing content that pleases that sponsor. Because we didn't have to do it, we could talk about funding and finances directly. We sold the magazine in a way that you could have a slider and you could decide how much to pay. If you leave it at €1, which says like, well, you're paying for blank paper of a magazine, for nothing else. And as you cannot read it, but as you are sliding, it tells you, now it includes a bit of ink, and then so you slide it further, so like now it includes some photography, now we can pay the authors. We would make the production of publishing a magazine a lot more transparent, showing it what it takes to make a magazine that you expect it to be made. What are the real costs of doing it, if we're doing for you? By taking the reader seriously, people could more they could more engage with us and to work with us also. So it went further, and we often would break it apart, and we would explain exactly the cost of operations. At the time, we were thinking like, should it be print magazine, should it be online magazine, or should it be hybrid? We allowed our readers to choose. This is what people choose. They could vote with their wallets. There would be different price tags to each edition. Let's see what they want to use. And more importantly, the content was sourced not just from predictable places in the world, but we try to be, again, very inclusive. That we include stories which are relevant and we can learn from all parts of the world. And if you look, this is basically a table of content. And different color, they show different issues. So this is the first issue, second issue, third issue, fourth issue. You'll see we have a lot of stories from India. We always include India because the spirit of jugaad, spirit of improvisation, was always very important for this magazine. So let's talk about a little bit about content. Another thing about publishing these days is that publishing is fascinated by novelty. It's fascinated by being the first one to report on something. And if you're the first one to report on it, you usually don't know enough. You can be the first one, but you're lacking the background information about the impact of that story. The impact of the story is only revealed over time. So, you can have a fantastic innovation, a designer who makes, I don't know, special lighting system for rural village in Africa. It sounds fantastic, and design magazines love these kind of stories, and they publish them. But they never publish what happens with that thing a year later or 10 years later. That becomes a non-story. They want to be the first one to report on the promise of something, but not on the real impact of something. This, from the beginning, it was clear that our editorial policy was different. We wanted to make sure that we talk about relevance and the lasting impact of design rather than just recentness. And we look at, again, from small innovations about practical things. This issue was produced in the Arctic region. We went to the north of Norway and to Svabiland, which are the islands in the Arctic Circle. How people drink beer in the Arctic when you're trying to keep your hands warm but the beer cold. There are special gloves for beer drinking. How do you bring light to places where there's no light because of the higher mountains and low-lying sun? How do you make sure that reindeer doesn't get hit by a car? How do you, small innovations. These are small stories. And then we do bigger stories. And again, they come from all around the world. They're not just coming from developing places. They're coming from all around the world. This is a story from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam Airport. Amsterdam Airport was the first one that they're playing around with behavioral design. a piece of design that is not just about how it looks, but how people react to it and how they interpret it. Well, first of all, half of audience probably have no idea what this is. This is a urinal, because you haven't been to the men's bathroom. If you do go to the men's bathroom, sometimes you see this. There's a picture of a fly. And like, most people don't think about it. You think it's a logo, or you think something. But it's a clever piece of design that was designed for men who are very simple. And men, when they see something, they aim for it. And it's positioned in a strategic spot where it reduces splashing, and therefore it reduces the cleaning cost. There's expectation that by including the image of a fly in a urinal, it saves 80% of cleaning cost in Amsterdam airport. If there were any instructions written, please do this, don't do that, people would ignore it. But just by producing simple image, you can achieve desired effect because you're playing with psychologies of men. There's a full story. All these articles are very long. This would be, like a 3,000 words long article documented with history, research. We're trying to make sure that, on one hand, it's a funny thing, it's surprising, but it's also really well researched to make sure that it explains how it works, what are the implications of such design, and what can we learn from this. We include stories from places that are often ignored. Have you ever heard about Sarajevo? Sarajevo was on the news some 15, 20 years ago because it was in the middle of war. When there was a war in the Balkan, Sarajevo was often on the news cycle because it was bombed. And it was surrounded by the Serbian army for 4.5 years. It was the longest lasting military siege that we know. For 4.5 years, people in Sarajevo had no supply to water, electricity, or any kind of supplies, which means that the Serbian army was trying to starve them to surrender. You often hear of these tragic situations, and I spoke to friends in Bosnia and Sarajevo, and I was surprised that I asked them, how did you survive it? How was it? And they often say, like, well, it was terrible. But at the same time, the life didn't stop. There were concerts going on. There were theater shows. And it's not something you consider. You consider always the tragedy because you zoomed out. Or if you zoom in with the camera on the ground, you often see a very different picture. So we went there, we went to Sarajevo, and we were speaking to people, and we discovered, to my surprise, the entire, like a recipe to creativity. People had lots of time because they couldn't go anywhere. They had a surplus of time and lack of resources, which is a perfect recipe to creativity. People would have to become inventors. They would have to kind of rethink their heating systems. They would improvise. They would rethink their lighting systems. They would recycle their cars. They would recycle anything which could be recycled. People would make stuff. Again, they would make stuff which traditionally you would not call design. But if you look at it, in what it does, and how it operates, it makes people's lives better. And that's why I think it's a fantastic piece of design. And each of them delivers a very precise story, what it does. So we make a story where we would speak to everyone who designed different objects, and they would talk about motivations and reasons for designing those things, and realize this was some of the best pieces of design I've ever seen, except you never see them in design context. We often look at the very old stories. As I said, we make it reverse. We avoid the novelty. We avoid like the new things. We try to look at all things and try to see what can we learn from this. We looked at there was a 23rd Army Division of the U.S. Army, which consisted of artists and designers during the Second World War. These were the Americans who were coming to Europe from the West, and the task was, they were not really armed, and it was the division consisted of graduates from design schools and architects and artists, and what they were tasked with to do was they were trying to confuse the enemy into thinking that there are bases of the army in places where they were not. Basically, they're creating a piece of theatrical show. They would create inflatable tanks. They would create, there would be famous artists who would work on this, creating sound installation that sounded like there are a lot of army forces. They would create very believable structures which are made for the Germans to think that their army was there. And in this way, they would protect thousands of people's lives. It's estimated that 20,000 lives could be saved because of this army, which didn't, not once use the weapons. They just used the creativity and improvisation in order to fool the enemy into doing something which they were not planning to do. I find it to be a good piece of design. One last example comes from this part of the world, not India, but the tiny neighbor of India, Bhutan. I went to Bhutan 2 years ago to make a special issue of Works at Work magazine. We traveled there because we are interested in exploring the models of sustainability. It's the only country which is carbon neutral, not carbon negative. It consumes more CO2 than it produces. But we discovered a lot more. We discovered my favorite story was the story of the Bhutanese postage stamps. Ever heard about Bhutanese postage stamps when you were a child? Bhutan produced the first stamps in the 60s when at that time they had no post office. It's kind of a weird idea to sell stamps when there's no post office and you could not send letters. There was no road infrastructure, there was nothing, but the idea was to produce stamps for the stamp collectors, and which could raise funds, and which could be used for building infrastructure later. So they produced stamps where you can basically print any value because these stamps were never used. This was purely fundraising, and collectors worldwide would want to be part of it. They would want to buy it, and it's a bit like like buying SIM cards for phones, but you would not use them. So it's a highly profitable thing to sell stamps which no one uses. The beginning was not very successful. When this series of stamps came, people are first confused, what is Bhutan? They never heard about it. And then secondly, they're not very spectacular. They're kind of look like any other stamp anywhere. There's a head of a king or a monk, of a founder of Bhutan. There's a place, but they're not very unique. Bhutan was trying to learn from this, and they hired designers to come up with the more innovative stamps. And the second series looked like this. These are the world's first 3D stamps produced in 1972. The first 3D stamps were from Bhutan, and they featured NASA astronauts, except they're not really NASA astronauts, they're toys which were just photographed. But this was a philatelist sensation. These were really successful stamps for collectors worldwide. And then they followed suit. These are the first stamps printed in silk, first stamp printed on metal. This is the first plastic extruded stamp, all in 60s and 70s. And my favorite is this. This is the first stamp, which is a small LP vinyl, this size, which can be used as a stamp. You put it in a letter, but you can also put it on your record player. And if you put it on a record player, it plays the story of Bhutan. There's a story narrated by the king of Bhutan, and they're traditional folk songs that are telling you about country. These stamps were highly successful, and selling these stamps allowed building the educational system of Bhutan, building roads, building the entire country's infrastructure. By the 1975, most of the GDP of Bhutan consisted of selling postage stamps. Creative industry fueled the development of the country. So if you look at this, it's not just beautiful by itself, but I think the implications of it, how it worked, and what impact it makes it an example of good design. I mentioned the magazine's intention was to avoid using advertising, but that means also that it changed it entirely how the magazine is distributed. If you're not using ads, you cannot use the traditional resale methods and not the distributors which sell magazines. If we would deliver, I showed you the example of a newsstand. Anything sold there, the money doesn't go back to the publisher. So it means that we need to change the way how we operate, and we have to propose something else.
Works That Work wants to examine often ignored areas of design. In the spirit of this aim, we also intend to bypass traditional distribution networks, which typically take the largest part of the cover price, as well as control where the publication will be sold and at what price. Instead, we would like to deepen our relationships with our readers and make them partners in this enterprise. We call this social distribution. Let's see how it works. A reader based, for example, in Buenos Aires knows a lovely bookstore in his town that could be a good place to sell a magazine. He first contacts the bookstore, and if they're interested, he then contacts us. The next time he or one of his friends travels to one of our magazine hubs, he buys copies of the magazine at a 50% discount. He in turn sells the magazines to the bookstore 60 to 75% of the cover price, so the reader's profit is 10 to 25% of the cover price. He sends information about the store to us, and we publish it on our website, driving other potential readers to the store. This distribution process supports local bookstores, involves readers as partners and agents of the magazine, ensures that all the parties get paid, and frees us up to focus on what we do best, publishing the magazine.
So thank you. What we did is we wanted to involve reader communities in a process of distribution. The readers themselves would know probably the best other people who may be interested in this. First idea was to bring magazines to physical bookstores, but we later thought if the idea is to find the shortest route between the maker and the reader, between the publisher and the reader, then maybe even bookstore was in a way. So we tried to find the most direct way. We designed these bags, distribution bags, where you could fit exactly 10 copies of the magazine. We would sell those for half price, where people either could make a bit of money, or it could be used to reduce the cost of getting magazines to places which would normally not buy design magazines. We would sell it to schools. We would sell it to, we're able to sell it a lot in South America, in Africa, even in India, in the Middle East, in places which were normally not served by normal book distribution. About 35% of our distribution was made in this informal way, where people just bring it from place to place. The rest would be mainly sold online directly by subscriptions. What we also did was that we realized, look, I came yesterday. I came to India for a few days. I'll be flying back very soon. I came with a big suitcase, which is largely empty. So my suitcase was not really well used. So we tried to observe the situation of unused and tap into unused resources. So we would have a database online where people could volunteer to say when they travel, and how much free space they have in the luggage. By doing so, people say, I'm going to Bombay this weekend, and I could take 2 kilos of stuff with me if someone picks it up at the airport. And we would organize the readers' communities to pick up things and distribute it among themselves. In this way, we could save the shipping cost, which would make probably the largest part of the magazine cover price is the shipping. When you involve community and you give them reasons to benefit from this, everyone would be benefiting from it. People are willing to help and to pitch in. Again, this would work surprisingly well. And one thing we never experienced is things that never got lost. Even without contracts, without completely informal things, people getting back to back, things worked extremely well. So what is good design? I think what I'm trying to do, my biggest ambition of myself, of course, besides feeding my family, is to produce examples of good design. And I believe is the work that we do with typography, I'm hoping is what qualifies as good design. The work we do with font stand, I'm hoping we can change some patterns that we observe, reduce the piracy, making using of new fonts a lot easier and better experience. And also hope that the magazine we publish is an example of what good design can be. Thank you. What questions do you have, if any? I realize it's a tricky time before lunch when people are trying to leave and
So I'm teaching typography here. So I want to learn what is a good platform to learn font design. Like what you use.
What tools we use.
Yeah.
I have to say that today is really the golden age of type design, because when I started, there were two design tools. One was obsolete and no longer used, was Icarus, which doesn't exist. And the other one was called FontLab, which was a Russian tool, which was not very well updated. But now we have a lot more. We have a tool that our students designed called RoboFont. I use it personally because it allows, we can program specific instructions within RoboFont. It's kind of extendable environment. It's not easy for the beginners, but it's a very powerful tool. What is really good for beginners is Glyphs. Glyphs is a German tool, which comes in 2 different models, so it's very easy to get in. And FontLab finally produced a new version, which is also out there. So now there are 3 professional tools which allow you to do really good work. There's also an open source font editor called FontForge, which is free, and it works on Unix and Mac and PC. It doesn't have a very good interface, but so I think for level of, if you really want to get into it, Glyphs is quite easy. And there are also some plugins that can, for example, take your work which you make in Illustrator and turn it into usable work, turn it into digital fonts. And often there are good online forums, there are discussions, people are willing to help, advise. So I think if you're looking to get into it, look online. Online you get lots of resources.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What is your opinion on serif and sans serif font, and which one do you prefer more?
Opinion about?
Serif and sans serif font.
Okay.
And which one do you prefer using more?
Right. Serif and sans serif are 2 classification methods of mainly Western fonts, which don't apply to other fonts. For example, you cannot call Devanagari font serif or sans serif. We talk about contrast, how much thick and thin there is. But this is a classification method which has nothing to do with functionality or legibility or anything else. So, you cannot say that one is better than the other one. Serif fonts in Europe have a lot longer tradition, because the first sans serif fonts are only about 200 years old. There was nothing before, while the serif font exists for 2,000 years. So they have much longer roots, and that's why they often use serif fonts for continuous small text, and sans serif fonts are used for display, more attention-grabbing things. But it fluctuates with fashions. Sometimes, right now, there's a fashion that all these brands using very simplified sans serif fonts. I'm sure it will change in the next 5 years. They will react and do something else. So you cannot really tell that one is better than the other one. You have to kind of talk about intentions and purpose, why they're made, what they're good for. And it takes a lot of kind of empirical testing, just to see, is it working for myself? And especially for you guys, when you work with multiple languages, what would kind of work in my culture? Because if you put serifs in Gujarati, it doesn't look great. So you need to kind of think what is the adequate term that can create multilingual documents. But in terms of classification, it's a bit like anything. If you classify movies, are comedies better movies than drama? you cannot really say this. It's just a general term, and within those categories you find good and bad examples.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Can I give it to her first and then, yeah.
Hello, sir. I'm Srinidhi. Firstly, I would like to thank you for coming and talking with us. It was a really interesting session. I have two questions for you. My first question is that what is your inspiration when you start out to create a new typeface? Because your profession is to create many new typefaces. Also, my second question is, I've done my research, and from what I know, your profession is in such a way that the economic returns are more on the longer run than in the shorter run. And if that is the case, similarly, when you want to design something for social change, or when you want to do something that is motivated out of changing something in the society, you are not going to get something in the short run. Your returns are going to be much lesser in the short run. What is your suggestion to deal with with this conflict as a designer? As a designer, what do you do to between money and between social change creation? What is your suggestions and what do you advocate?
I'll start with the social or long-term planning, or I don't know how to call it. You're right that most of the world's economy is run by focus on returns, quarter returns, and immediate results and immediate gratifications. While we realize that the values that we have are often much longer term. And I would like to see that you don't have to choose one or the other one. Often when we try to do things for the longer term, they tend to work commercially well also on short term, because you're making decisions which are set to benefit other people. So you're not ignoring some people to do it. We ignore kind of like a cycles of fashions because that changes too often, which actually links to the first question. For example, we never design fonts just by following what is trendy right now, because first it takes so long to make a new font that if you did it, by the time we finish, it's obsolete. It's no longer relevant. So by looking at the kind of the deeper values, like a longer term interest, it works for the best for all of us. That maybe it's not immediate. For example, the magazine, the first two issues, the print run was 3,000, was not a very big one. But I always believe that by talking about it, by word of mouth, marketing, it will work on longer term, and the whole enterprise will set up that it is made for the entire duration of it. So all our projects are made like this. Next week's results are important, of course, but they're not as important as what are the missions for much longer term. So we never would make decisions based only on financial returns on the short term, because it's very limited, and that is subject to change immediately. Even if you become very successful, and I see game developers, which have to react very quickly, they make a hit, but it doesn't guarantee that they can continue making hit after hit after hit. It makes it very difficult. So by creating making decisions which allow them to involve more people and see how to create models, how to create structures, how to create situations where you can continuously keep coming with work which is relevant. And I think, what we study in design school is not particular design tools. We're learning asking questions. And I think that's what the best thing is. You always ask questions, what I want to do, how can I help other people? And the answers change all the time. So there's not one inspiration, there's not one kind of model that we use. We rethink our models all the time. With all our work, with my theater work, with my typography work, with the publishing world, I made different magazines before. They work completely differently, but you do it always if I make a magazine now, I cannot use a model which is from 1830s. We have to think how I can get the most, how can I benefit from this fact that people are interested about background of things. They want to know where these jeans are coming from, where the coffee beans are coming from. How can I discuss, things which are how can I make this whole world transparent and explain these things? So one doesn't exclude the other one. Like I think the long-term planning benefits also short-term results.
I think there was another question, and then we'll have to. Just one, there's an announcement that the next session is delayed. So instead of starting at 2 p.m., we'll be starting at 3. Okay?
Hello, sir. Hello. Hi, sir. When you first started Works That Work, how many people were initially involved in it?
Works That Work was quite a selfish project. I have to say I started on my own. And, but I knew right away that it could not exist if I did it alone. But the beginnings of projects are always like this. You know, like to be able to convince or to allow people to join, you need to create a model. You need to show them what it is. If I would come to you now, it's like, I wanted this great magazine that never existed before. People go like, well, what do you mean? How? Show me examples. So I did a lot of preparation work, almost a year of preparation before that on my own, drafting list of possible stories, looking at how it could operate, and then finally making a list of people I'd love to work with. There's some people I knew, but then there was a long list of people I admired and I didn't know them, and I was hoping that this could be a way to approach them because I want to work with them. I set up the model that everyone got paid, so all photo contributors, translators, researchers, writers, everyone. So that was a great occasion for me to approach people that I always wanted to work with. At the end, a core team of people, there are 2 designers, there are 2 language editors and a proofreader. We had a mini editorial team of 3. So the core team people would be about 7, 8 people. And then for every issue, we would invite about a dozen of contributors, a dozen photographers. So kind of amplified. And the longer you do it, the easier it becomes because then people see what it is. So the second issue was already much easier because I could come to people like, okay, this is what we're doing. Would you like to be part of it? So it scales. And I think that's, but you have to be prepared to do a lot of work by yourself at the beginning. Hungry? Yeah?
Any other questions? Yeah, okay, there's a young, enthusiastic students.
Hi, sir. So, yeah, my question is, so do you believe in designing typefaces only if a problem exists? Or do you believe in, like, for example, if we look at Calcula, it doesn't, if we look at, like, it doesn't really solve a problem if we look at it. So do you believe in designing typefaces only if a problem exists, or even look at the aesthetic sense of typefaces?
It's a good question. There's a whole school of thoughts of design as a problem-solving enterprise, as the design is driven by real-world problems. To be honest, like in the old days, there are a lot of technological reasons to design type. And you see a lot of typefaces are designed to address technological changes. When we switch from hot metal type to photo lettering, when we switch to digital type, it always fuels creation of a lot of new fonts. But often they just using new formats to do old work. It's not creatively new. They would create new version of Garamond, Renaissance font, made for digital environments. So I would say, is it a problem solving if you just repurpose or reintroduce something old? What we do is we try to go beyond this. I don't think I need a problem to do work. My work is not defined by problems. My work is often expression of possibilities. As I mentioned, like I think the world is underserved by looking at other languages. I think there's a lot of kind of what we can do about this, but also the requirements are changing. As we work a lot more with screens, I can involve, for example, time element into typography. I can create animated typefaces which never existed. It was never a problem, but I can use new possibilities, for new expression that can be used on the web, in films. So a lot of our work is speculative. It's trying to ask, like, what if I could do this? We always hope to do something which never existed before, which, you solve problems. If you solve problems, you address things which exist, and often they're rooted in some kind of historical thing. So you're going back. While we recognize this, we often try to go below this. You have to kind of go outside of this box to see what else can you do. Because I do think that although there's a lot of typefaces made, there's still a lot more possibilities which are left to explore.
Anyone else? Peter, you're most welcome. If you're really hungry,
I can survive.
Hello, sir. If a person is completely new to typography, where does he start?
You get a pen and a notebook.
That's a great answer.
I think this is really what it takes. I have a small bag with me, and I always carry a notebook and a pen. I don't need anything else. I brought this computer with me because of presentation, not because I need to use it now. So really, making notes about ideas, sketching them. Notebooks allows thinking visually. So it's not really just making notes, but kind of exploring visual ideas. What happens if I do this? Does it work? You're training not only your arm, but you're training your mind. You're training the connection between the two. You're trained to see the differences, and slowly you'll find, technologically you can find any solution you want. If you know what you want to do, you'll find a way how to do it. It's more about finding what do you really want to do. Is it what you're interested in? If you are, it's quite easy.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody at the back?
There are two people in the back.
Okay, I think we must give the people at the back a chance. So does someone have a mic there? Can one of you please? I think we have time for 2 questions. There's another announcement that the second panel, as I said, is going to be from 3 to 5, and there's a panel discussion from 5 to 7. I'm not sure where the venue is. Can someone tell me where the venue is? In the auditorium. Yeah?
Okay. So hello, sir, I'm Sudeshna. And I wanted to ask, when you design something for someone more local, or as you said, everyone don't understand English, and some languages are endangered. So how do you explain them that it's for their betterment? Because they're really attached to their roots, and it's hard for them to accept change.
I hope I understood the question well. Was it about understanding other languages? If you hold the microphone closer, I'll probably...
Okay, so when you design for someone who is really connected to their roots, it's hard for us to explain them that it's for their betterment. So
are you talking in relation to typography or general design?
General design.
General design. She means if you were to design specifically for somebody who don't appreciate or understand?
Let's say for old people, for our, just an example, for our grandparents, they're attached to their roots.
She means if you are designing for an audience who are very attached to their social context, how would you change it? Or would you change it at all?
There's no reason to change anything. I think it's kind of the inclusive approach, speaking to them, involving them, understanding them is the key. Understanding why they're resistant to changes, why they're insisting on certain solutions. I think it's starting with this, recognizing rather than trying to change something. Change is, it can be quite brutal. So it's more about kind of speaking them, hearing their voice, why they think, am I getting?
I didn't really mean change, but something better for them.
I think what she meant was, if you're designing something for an endangered language, for example, so the community which is currently serving the language, how do you make them understand that your intervention is for the benefit of the language? Sometimes the communities are not aware of it.
Well, it's often simple. Like there's immediate benefit. There are regional languages in India which we've dealt with. For example, they're not encoded. You could not, if they're not encoded, you cannot even design digital fonts. Okay, it's simple as this. That means that you cannot publish books, you cannot have text online, you cannot text, you cannot. This is the example of this digital extension. You could have manuscripts, you can handwrite it, and I think it's quite clear when you explain it like that. That the work can allow them to make sure that that language is relevant in the 21st century. I see that there could be resistance, especially resistance. I think the question is like why this white man comes here would want to do something like this, which is a valid question. Like often there are bad examples of missionaries trying to convert things. This is out of pure respect for cultures, work we do. And again, I think if you open to talk about it, what it means, usually people are sensitive to recognizing if it really makes any change or impact for them. Maybe I could be mistaken, like maybe sometimes we invest into something that is not necessary. But that's why it's good to speak to people. We design fonts for indigenous Canadian syllabic languages which didn't exist. They didn't have digital forms. We design it for often minority languages in Siberia where there are only 50 survival speakers. So we dealt with this. There haven't been truly like a resistance to it because people see if they don't have this, they have nothing else. So it allows them to kind of have some presence in digital world. Often big companies are not doing it to hurt them, but for them it's an extra investment to support like a language which is so marginal. So often we do kind of this investment and can explain it also to big companies that it's better not to exclude small languages.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
One more. I think we just have time for the last question. I think I'll give it to the girl there.
Sir, I would like to ask a question. In relation, what is your ideation or process of representing and integrating linguistic languages, basic or Indic languages?
I heard parts of the question, not the full.
Sir, what is your ideation?
Keep microphone still. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Sir, what is your ideation?
Move the other hand.
Yeah. Sir, what is your ideation or process of representing and creating, integrating linguistic languages, especially Indic languages?
Well, it's not, I don't know if the word ideation would be correct. There's a pure research, and we try to map possibilities, in trying to kind of look how historically they've been made, what is the impact of technology, what is the impact of surrounding languages, what are the needs of the current language. Often languages, they're not static, they evolve. Sometimes they absorb new sounds, new words, and they need to have a different representation. Often when we work with languages, we realize that they've been reduced forcefully by previous technologies, and we're trying to liberate it from this. For example, with metal type, these machines were not made to write Arabic or Devanagari, and we can't see, okay, how digital technology can allow making it correctly, correct rendering of conjuncts, of vowels, of everything. So it's a quite humble research work rather than kind of ideation of I have this great concept, what I want to do. It really kind of goes from the roots of what is necessary to make a language visible. The more conceptual projects are often used for simple things, when the foundation is done. You first need kind of the basic tools, and only then you can create kind of more expressive tools later to do them. So it goes step by step. It doesn't happen all at the same time.
Thank you, sir.
This is the last question, and I would request everybody to please remain seated if possible.
Good afternoon, sir. You mentioned a thing about piracy, and how do you deal with piracy in that case? If you have designed a typeface, how do we make sure that we are getting the price or whatever we decide for it?
Well, I was trying to show examples how we deal with it, because there are two ways to deal with it. Like, you could design something, and if you're very protective of it and you don't want your work to be misused and pirated, the best way is to lock it in your drawer and never show it to anyone. But if you decide that your work has a value for other people and you want to show that value and share with other people, then you publish it. And the act of publishing means it's a sharing, and it becomes part of the larger world. There's a chance of misusing it, there's a chance of piracy, and that's why we take it as our work to consider distribution of work, magazine distribution or digital distribution, as part of our responsibilities. Before, when we started 20 years ago, the only way to sell phones was selling them on floppy disks. That is no longer there. Now the digital downloading, it's so easy, but also allows really easy piracy. So we produced this font streaming method called FontStand, which, in my mind, it reduces the piracy because it gives you a quick way to try. First of all, many people are pirating things out of curiosity. They don't even know if they need it. So this would be kind of a legal way to try things for free, and then price it, very affordably, that if you really want to use it, that you can do it, that it doesn't cost a fortune. You don't need to take a loan to use it. And we also have a model that US students should not pay the same price as a big corporation. I think it makes sense, which in the old days there was no distinction. If a big newspapers would buy a font or you bought it, it's the same price tag, it's the same product. But we're trying to make sure that there are different tiers depending on the use, and we're trying to kind of also think of creative ways of licensing our work. So it's not only making it, but also kind of the final delivery is part of our design process. And we always pay more attention not to police people, but to recognize the different patterns that happen and to include them. So if people want to try it, if they want to have easy access to it, we can certainly come up with methods to do it, and FontStand is one way.